out of the ordinary insights. Brought to you by Investec Specialist Bank.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Captains of Industry. My name is Gugulethu Mfuphi. Well, today we have the opportunity to speak to a phenomenal woman in the South African media space, Terry Volkwyn, who is the Chief Executive of Primedia Broadcasting. Terry, thank you so much for your time. Perhaps we need to highlight all the successes and achievements that you've made so far. And one particular award that stands out is you're the Woman of Decade in Media Award, and that was awarded to you by First for Women Insurance Group. So with such a huge title, on your pedestal, perhaps it should come with a heavy load of responsibility as well.
Yes, I suppose it does. You know, the Women in the Media was started 10 years ago, I think 10 years ago. And it's a pity that they had to create something particularly for women. And this is one of my issues. But 10 years on, when you see the progression of women in the media, there are so many of them coming through the ranks. So it's nice to have it, and yes, I'm the Woman of the Decade, which puts me in the old club, I think. But it does carry pressure, but it's also wonderful to be recognised by your peers.
Indeed. But perhaps if you can walk us through your childhood as well as your early career highlights, because Terry didn't wake up one morning and just decide to be a CEO. Walk us through your childhood in the Free State, I understand.
Oh, gosh. I was hoping you wouldn't find that piece of research. Yes, I was born in the Free State in a small town called Volkwyn. My father was on the mines, the Anglo mines. So I grew up in that environment. And when he was transferred to Gauteng many, many years ago, I don't think I ever thought of going into business. One of the things I wanted to do was dress designing. And in fact, that's what I studied in Durban for 3 years at Technikon. And then I had to come to the big world of Joburg. And I had to find a job, and I landed up doing temp work for the Rand Daily Mail many, many years ago, and that was my first entry into the media world, and I just loved it. And that's how I got into the media world. And then when 702 had just started,
back when it was a music station, perhaps.
Yeah, years ago. It was a very rebellious station, which appealed to my nature, and it was called Channel 702, the Rainbow of Sound. And they were looking for salespeople, and it was an area that I had sort of fell into in print. So I applied for a job at Channel 702 for a direct rep selling advertising, and that's how I landed up in radio.
Clearly at that time as well, because that was in the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken, a tumultuous time for South Africa politically. How did you perceive things, especially in the media industry where you were exposed to so much more than just the average man on the street?
Correct. The first thing that struck me was how little we knew. And it was an eye-opener for me to be thrust into this world and then to find out really what was going on in the country. And again, I think the rebellious nature of all of us just pushed us forward. And I remember the day at 702 when the vote went out for the referendum, should we have an election? And we were on fire to get a yes, which obviously, as you know, came through at the time. And it was just wonderful to actually know that you were in it. And the momentum then just made me fall in love with 702 and what it was doing in those days. Even though it was a music station, they had introduced 1 or 2 talk shows, and we were interviewing everybody who was so-called banned. So it was a wonderful time to be in the media industry and to be part of what was happening in this country.
And naturally, slowly but surely, from being a sales rep, you've now managed to make your way to being the CEO of Primedia Broadcasting, which not only takes care of the likes of 702, but Highveld, Cape Talk, as well as KFM. As you viewed media changing, we know that we've got social media coming on board now, and many people are saying that traditional media is perhaps dying. How have you viewed that transition as this new technology age takes form in the media space?
Yeah, you know, the traditional media dying thing came out of America some 15 years back. And we never ever believed it. And also I think South Africa is not on the same time path as America. So there was a dreadful time where traditional radio would die. But if you come into South Africa's context, radio played a very big part. Because of the illiteracy rates, people listen to radio, etc. So we never ever fell into the trap of thinking it would die. And in fact, it just got stronger and stronger. And then when they deregulated and more stations were allowed into the industry, it became stronger and stronger, and radio's market share grew. Now we're in a new phase, which you rightfully say is the digital era, which has been the best complement to radio. So although you look at television and digital is working together, it's similar. You still got to go on and watch something. For radio, it's given us a new angle. So it's made us become visual, which radio never had before. And why it fits so well is because it's just as immediate as radio. So radio moves very quickly, as you know, and it's given us a whole new business and structure to go into. So we're loving it.
How do you keep radio relevant then when there's so many ancillary components now that need to be attached to it?
I think that radio moves very quickly onto the topics, and you can do quite long form interviews, and what we've got in our favour is we can then promote what we're doing online. So although there's a lot on the digital space, on the phones, online, computers, tablets, whichever way you look at it, we have the unique ability of telling our listeners to go there. So we're busy. Our industry is changing. I don't think we're in the broadcasting industry anymore. You know, broadcasting was an old thing like broadcasting, and it was one way to a listener. And radio has changed. It's now very interactive with the listener, so we're connecting with people. So not only are they listeners, they're users, and radio has moved into connecting people, either with information or with advertising opportunities or with listeners getting help. So our business is changing into connecting people.
So clearly staying ahead of the pack must be a bit of a challenge. I understand you were CEO, appointed CEO back in 2002, so it's more than 10 years now that you've been at the helm. This change into the digital age, how big of a threat perhaps as opposed to other forms of broadcasting?
Look, I think it's a threat, but obviously our user base in South Africa is still too small, but it's going to grow and it is the future. So it's not a threat, I don't think, for many companies in South Africa, maybe print on its own, but even print is using the digital media and converting into that. So I just think it's a wonderful opportunity with growth and exponential growth, because we're at the bottom end of the curve. So as more people get access to this format, which is so right for the South African market across all the LSMs, and connecting that public in, it's just enormous. The opportunities are enormous. And for me, being the older person in the company, I'm surprised at how much I understand, and maybe it's due to my teenage children. So I never thought I would connect to it the way I have, but I fully understand the medium and the way we can use it and how it connects to my business.
I'd like to touch perhaps on a passion of yours, and that's women empowerment, in particular within the media space. I recall when you won the award for Woman of the Decade, you mentioned that there are still glass ceilings that need to be broken. How challenging has your tenure as chief executive been from a female's perspective?
I think I've been lucky that I have not faced what many women face, and I work with women's groups and you hear the challenges they face. I've probably been in a very progressive company where the glass ceiling was there, but not to the same extent. And I never had the same problems that some women have faced, but I know that it's out there and I know it's very challenging. So I've had a relatively easy ride. Listen, there are days I'm the only female on the executive team. I see things differently. I feel things that perhaps my colleagues don't. But I play a role there, and I think I'm understanding of where my male colleagues are, and I just hope that it moves beyond women and men and we get to people in the media. But I've mentored a lot of women onto how to play this game, because I made some dreadful mistakes. I mean, I would completely erupt and blow up, and that would cause me a new problem in my drive going through it, because women do think differently in business, and I think they're incredibly powerful at bringing in the human side of business, which, as you know, is now a major topic in Davos. I mean, people need to be taken care of. And I think when women started with that, it was like, oh, there she goes, you know. Emotional female.
Indeed. But you
was
mentioned
a title
there,
I had for a while.
was it? Perhaps if you can walk us through that. You say that you've mentored a lot of women into how to play the game, and there's several women coming up in your organization as well as in the bigger media space alone. But perhaps if there are top things that they should keep in mind when playing this media game, what would those be?
Look, I've got quite a few females in my management team and in the organization, but I'm very aware of keeping the balance, because men play a different role that is valuable, and women need that. So my biggest thing with my women managers, I mean, to put it in a nutshell, I say two things to them always. Sit on your hands and keep quiet.
Why?
Because women talk, they jump in emotionally too quickly, and they need to listen, which is something you gain, I think, with experience and age. It also, women who've had children learn the skill a little bit better than others. So one of the things I often watch them do, they don't let anybody finish. They're busy fixing the problem. And they are, and they're on the right track, but it's how it comes across. So my biggest advice to my team, often, I just put my hand up and go, stop. Just stop. So we have a joke. Sit on your hands, because women talk with their hands, so I always make them sit on it. And when they feel the shoulder go, they know they've got to keep quiet. That's the one trick. And keep quiet. Or in a very joking term, I go, have a sip of water, don't swallow.
Well, some significant lessons, clearly. Significant
Thanks.
lessons. But you touched on Davos, and that's also a stat that I picked up, that of the attendees or the delegates that actually attend Davos, only 15% of them are female. And that excludes partners to the delegates, as well as the media contingency there. Do you think perhaps, from the South African perspective in particular, that we're still facing a cultural age where women find it challenging to be at the helm, because we're not used to that from a cultural perspective?
Well, the stats speak for themselves, but they're improving. So clearly women do, and they're not given the opportunity. And I think each country is faced with different reasons as to why this happens. But it's definitely changing. So at least there are 15% at Davos. There weren't a couple of years ago. And I think it needs to move quicker. And perhaps now, everything in life, I have another belief. It's always slowly, slowly, and then suddenly. So I think we'll see a lot of change in that area. Well, I hope so.
Let's hope so.
Yep.
Well, Terry, just before the ad break, we touched on women development and how things are changing in the media. But how do you feel about developing our youth in South Africa? We know that we have a very high unemployment rate, but how are we, or yourself in the media industry, working on cultivating youngsters in South Africa?
Look, education is a passion of ours. As you know, Primedia Broadcasting launched a thing called Lead SA. And a lot of it is just about doing the right thing. And one of the right things that we should be doing is concentrating on our youth, because they are our future. And the education system and what's happening there is not helping them. So we're passionate about it. It's not that easy to break into the space, but part of our mandate that we've put in on Lead SA is education. And I mean, as we speak, we have matriculants at Gibbs today on a free 2-day course before they go to varsity on leadership. So one of the things we've picked up is children are not given the skills on even how to plan to do a school project. So they don't have the mentorship or the leadership or the skills to do very basic leadership things at school even. So they can't cope, and we see this with the dropout rate of matriculants going into university. Because all of a sudden there you have to plan. You need a plan of action, you need a to-do list, you need the basics in place, and they're not difficult once you're shown how. So we are passionate about it. We're putting all our resources into these matriculants going forward. We often run programs for matriculants coming out and going into varsity. And then we're very active in schools. And we've gone into schools right down into the basics, where we believe strongly in a Bill of Responsibilities. So what are your rights? If you have a right to education, there are certain responsibilities you have to have, which is I will learn, I will do my homework, I will do the basics. So we drive that very strongly, and I think I have to believe we make a difference, even if it's only to one child. But the magnitude of the problem always makes me panic about whether we're making any difference there. But we're currently in our strategy now as we go into our new financial year, which is in July, so we start working on it now. And although my radio stations are primarily, they work LSM 7 to 10, that's our niche, and our formats that are given to us by our license conditions don't allow us particularly to do very youth-driven programming. But we are finding ways now through digital where we can get into talking to the youth on a different level, and we're starting to look at perhaps some, particularly on the talks, doing some programs about the youth's point of view to the issues that we face. And these will be filtering through, because it's quite interesting on talk radio, which is seen as an older format. The listenership's getting younger and younger. So the youth today have far more access, they're far more savvy, they know more than we ever did when we were young. And I think that they can make a difference. So we're starting to try and push more and more into doing things for the youth by just empowering them with information or contacts. And the digital side is enormous. So we're getting to them there as well.
I take it empowerment is also important for you because you are a mother of teenage children.
2 girls.
2 girls.
For my sons.
Not at all. They grown-up Barbie dolls, I'd like to believe now, and probably play dress up in your wardrobe still. But are there any tips of the trade or motivating factors that you encourage them with at home from a mother's perspective, being in such a huge industry in South Africa?
Look, my girls have been exposed to a lot, probably unlike any other home, and I never kept them away from anything. And also there's great debate in my house because of the work that I do. So, you know, did you hear this or did you hear that, or this is wrong or that is wrong. So they're well exposed to both the nice side of life. They're quite spoilt because they have access to certain things, but I also drive them very hard on the CSR side. So when we're doing Christmas Wish, I will take them with as little children to go and deliver gifts so that they can see what is happening there. They go out, they do charity work, so they're well rounded, I believe, from that point of view. And I teach them to be very self-sufficient because I've had to. So they've got working, busy parents, and they're very good at organizing, you know, packing their own bags, working out what their schedules are, which I think is so important. So I'm very strong with that, but it's also a coping mechanism. And there was one day when I looked at them and said, I'm so sorry, I'm not around to do what I should be doing or what I thought I should be doing. And they both looked at me and said, what are you talking about? And it dawned on me at that point, they know no different. So what guilt am I carrying? And since then, I've been fine. I'm carrying something in my head that I think should be done. And they know no different, and they're quite happy.
Does that perhaps stem from how you grew up, where your mother was constantly involved in your life?
Correct. The tapes, you know, in your head. I think it was a big wake-up call for me. But I do make an effort to be around my children, and I'm very conscious of where they are in their lives and what impacts, like I'm watching Facebook and the whole social network thing.
So a caring mother who's also stern and a very productive chief executive as well at Primedia. How do you strike that perfect balance? Isn't it challenging at times?
I think it's a fallacy. I don't think you ever do. And I think women who try to just add more pressure in their lives, and then they're more stressed. So I take it, I'm well planned, so that does help. So I sort of get the dates, the calendar comes out, we work everything, we book the trips, we get it done. I buy all the birthday gifts in the drawer a year in advance, go and pick one. So I take a lot off my plate from that point of view, and then we take it day by day. And some days we get it right and some days we get it wrong.
Terry, you've also led up Primedia Broadcasting for the more than 10 years at the helm. Do you ever feel as though you've reached your peak or your pinnacle, or are you still ambitious? And if so, what is still driving you? Interesting question coming at this time. I think that CEOs have to move on. And I think that you play a certain role and you bring a certain value, and then the business needs new things. So it depends what role you play at the helm, but I have got ambitious, good people underneath me, with me. This whole digital era, I mean, there are some conversations that they have around this where I think, what are you talking about? I understand the outcome, but I'm unable to manage the process. And they're going to laugh when they hear this, but I know I can't. So I would never be able to run that project because I wouldn't know what to check. So I'm very conscious of what I don't understand and don't know, and I'm now making a conscious effort not to go in. So I'm letting projects start to move away from my desk, and therefore the role you start to play in the business will change. I don't think I'm going to pull out and just stop one day, but I do think that the time I spend and the amount of people I mentor, you keep pulling back, because people never learn until you actually put them in the seat. So it's a bit like driving, you know, you only learn to drive when you've actually got the license. Exactly.
And so that's what I'm currently in. I'm currently in looking at a rollout succession plan, to get these people and the management team into different roles, which will allow me to play a different role. And, you know, there's other things I'd like to do.
How important is it for leaders to think that way, perhaps? Because so often
it's very important. To
get
hold on to
comfortable.
that power is, it's wrong. It's wrong on every level. It's wrong on a personal level for the people coming through. It's wrong because society moves and you need new thinking. I just think it's boring, you know.
Well, that's exciting to hear that you have other ventures. Is there a particular hidden talent or hidden hobby that you like to indulge in?
Look, I'm quite creative, and although I've been in business, which is not where I thought I would land, I use my creative ability in it, and I'm in a wonderful industry where creativity reigns and innovation, they're linked. But I think I'm a frustrated architect or interior designer or something along those lines. I'm not a woman who's dies about fashion and I've got to have every colour, but I do like beautiful things and I have a knack. So at the office they're always complaining because I'm always building, I'm always rebuilding, or I'm changing something. And I think it's important. I think that the environment needs to move, and I'm renovating a barn in France currently, so that's a challenge. I'm learning to speak French. That is a big, big challenge.
Français?
Oui, madame. That's all I know. Don't push me.
So we can expect a collection anytime soon, perhaps. The Volkwyn interior.
Oh, what a surname, hey? I had to take this husband's surname. When I was made a director as a woman in business, I needed my husband's permission.
How come?
That was the law at the time. So if you were made a director, you needed your husband's permission. And I had not taken my husband's surname, so I had to at that point. So I always tease him. It's not a good name for a product, but that's how it's moved along for women.
Indeed. And that perhaps brings me to my next question, is your legacy. If at all one day you know, something needs to be said about Terry Volkwyn, what would you like people to remember?
Definitely the launch of Lead SA and making people aware that you have to treat people with respect. You know, you have to make a difference, you have to care, and you have to try and put back into society. You can't keep taking from it. And if I look at my staff, and I remember launching this to them, there was a profound shift in the way, particularly journalists, which are hardcore or talk show hosts, had a certain view, and there was a certain ego about them. You know, look at me, it's me, and I'm doing whatever. And I think I have entrenched that into them, and we have good conversations around it, and it's changed programming and the way they approach stuff on air. So they do a lot, and they're more willing to get involved, and instead of giving them profit share, I've been given the money to charity and make them work in the charity, and that went down quite well with them, not every year, but I think that's the legacy I would want to leave, that you have to care.
And if you had to speak to that 18-year-old Terry who moved from the Free State and studied fashion design in Durban and made her way to Joburg, what piece of advice perhaps would you give her that would set out your path a lot more clearly?
I probably would have told her to listen more and perhaps take advice. You know, you just think you know it all. And maybe that's part of the success. You think you know it all and you think you're bulletproof, so you're not scared of anything. But in hindsight, the mistakes that I did make, nothing major that crashed my world, but I could have perhaps moved through my career easier than I did in the early days. Very strong, very domineering, my way or the highway. Same lesson, you know, you need to care and listen a bit. And I think mentorship is a good thing, something I never did. And wisdom. Speak to people who have wisdom.
See why we're talking